Hello, welcome back to another video. My name is Gemma and I am very far behind with my wrap-ups. So I haven't done a wrap-up in 3 months. So that's May, June and July. And we are rapidly approaching the end of August. So I'm going to be 4 in debt. So in an attempt to rip off that bandage with regard to filming, editing, uploading, all of the things, I'm going to do 3 days of wrapping up. So I'm going to wrap up 3 months in 3 days. That's what I'm trying to say. So today I'm going to talk you through the books from May, tomorrow will be June, and then the day after will be July. So we're going to quick fire get through these books because I've read some fantastic books and I did think about just not wrapping up for May and June, but then there were some books that I really wanted to talk to you guys about, so I'm just going to do it. And it's yeah, we're going to crack on and do that. So let's not waffle any further. The books that I read in May. So May was a good and a bad reading month. In terms of, I read 15 books and some of them were very good, but I also DNF'd 6. I had absolutely no patience in May for anything that I just couldn't gel with, and it just got twanged. So we'll start with the DNFs, the books that I did not finish, and we'll work our way up. So in 21st position, we have We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, translated by Clarence Brown, and this is a classic sci-fi translated from Russian, and this is the book that inspired 1984 by George Orwell. Now that was what made me want to read it, but in hindsight I feel like my logic was flawed, because though I like the concept of 1984, I actually find the writing and some of the stuff in it quite dry. Don't come for me. I much preferred Sandra Newman's retelling of Julia in a more modern style with a feminist lilt. So I probably should have known going into We that it wasn't going to be quite what I wanted it to be. And yeah, I DNF'd this quite early. I was buddy reading this with Matt from Baskin's Story, and I believe he finished it. So sorry Matt for bailing on that, but I just found it really misogynistic, and also it just, the way it was structured didn't really work for me. It was quite jumpy, the narrative was quite jumpy, and the main character was a bit difficult to relate to in any way, shape or form, so it just didn't work for me and I binned that off. So yeah, I mean, if you're a diehard Orwell fan, then you may well love that book, but no, it was not for me. And I think if you are feminist in any way, maybe give it a swerve. Next we have a poetry collection, Self-Portrait as Othello by Jason Allen-Paisant, and I am not a huge poetry reader. So I have got on with some poetry in the past, so I do occasionally dip my toe in. This one I got quite a lot of literary praise, so I thought I'd give it a go. It wasn't for me. I'm not a poetry person, so I'm not even going to like critique it. It just wasn't my jam. So yeah, I read half a dozen poems and then gave that back to the library. Next, in 19th position, is one that possibly I'm not going to get away with skirting over so much, and that's Thunderclap by Laura Cummings. So this was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction and shortlisted, and this looks at art and the painting The Goldfinch, I believe, and I know like so many people have loved this, but I'm just not an art person, right? I'm not an art person, and it's quite art heavy, and it talks a lot about art and art galleries and different paintings, and I just don't care. Just don't care. So I remember messaging Charlie and Alice about this when I was reading it, and I think my exact words were, "When is all the boring art bollocks going to be finished?" And they were like, "That's not the whole book, Gemma." It's like, okay, this is not for me. So no, and I think that's actually the first from the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction that I've picked up and not enjoyed. So yeah, that's to say that, you know, the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction picked some great books this year. That one just wasn't my jam. Then I have Cecilia by K-Ming Chang, which was actually a proof copy and only 150 pages, and I just didn't care. It's about a young woman who, I think she was working in a dental surgery or something, and it gave me vibes of The Vegetarian by Han Kang. So if you like that book, I think you will like Cecilia, but it was just a bit too stream of consciousness and a bit sort of off the wall-ish for my reading taste, and I knew that 20 pages in, so I thought rather than giving it a negative review, I'd be better off to just put it to one side. And I believe it's sat on Charlie's bookshelf now. Charlie Brooke took that off my hands, and I think she is definitely more the kind of reader that that book will appeal to. And then 17, we're still in DNFs. We have Wow No Thank You by Samantha Irby. This is an essay collection, a comedic essay collection, and though I do like comedy from time to time, I feel like my sense of humour is very, very dry and sarcastic. So more in your face humour doesn't work for me, and I think that's what Samantha Irby is. She is an American celebrity of some definition. I don't really know. Maybe she does like chat shows. I don't know. Radio? Does she do radio? I don't. Oh, pass. And so I just couldn't gel with her narration at all through these essays. I need someone who takes themselves a lot less seriously, I think. I don't know. I don't know if that's even fair, but basically her sense of humour didn't work for me. And then my last DNF for May was Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan? Nisha Dolan. Yes, Nisha Dolan, who's an Irish author, and this book was nominated for the Women's Prize a few years ago, and everyone raved about it, about this girl who goes over to Japan to become a teacher.
You're going to show your friends them, remember?
And she gets into a relationship that possibly isn't super healthy. But I just found it really dull. I didn't like the main character. I didn't like the love interest. Something happened. I gave up about halfway through, and something was happening that would have made it slightly more interesting, but still not interesting enough for me to care. It definitely was not exciting times for me as a reader. It was dull times. And this was the first and only book to date that was a work book club pick that I haven't finished. So yeah, I know loads of people loved it. I thought it was pants. What can I say? Okay, then we move into books I actually finished. And we have Ulysses by James Joyce, which got half a star because words were on a page. And I didn't mind the chapter where he did a poo and ate a kidney. That was the highlight. That was chapter 3. Yeah, no, don't read Ulysses. Don't read it. It's absolute gobbledygook. The first few chapters are fine, and then he goes like really into like not even stream of consciousness, like just garbage, like gobbledygook garbage. I detested it, with little smatterings of porn thrown in here and there for good measure. Actually, the last chapter, which was written from a different perspective, I didn't mind that one. That was fine. I don't feel like I have anything else to say about this book. I've erased it from my mind. I did read this with my fabulous friend Alice, so yeah, it's a bit odd for me now to go back and review the books from May, because Alice was still with us then and now she's not. But yeah. Anyway. 14. 14th place, we have The Trumpeter of Krakow by Eric P. Kelly, which is a children's book in theory. It's historical fantasy set in Krakow, as the title would suggest. And like the blurb made it sound really exciting. It's like alchemists and wizards and, you know, magic gems and, or not magic, but big gems. And yeah, it was just really dull. It was really dull. It took so long to get going, and then by the time like the plot kicked in, I just didn't care anymore. Yeah, probably one of the worst children's books I've ever read. 2 stars. Then we have The Wren The Wren by Anna Enright, which I gave 2.5 stars. This was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and like most people, I didn't like this. And it's a shame because it started off quite positively. I really liked the first chapter because we follow various different points of view throughout this book, and we start with the youngest generation, and I quite enjoyed her narrative. It felt quite modern and it felt quite authentic, and yeah, I quite like that. And then it just went a bit waffly. Didn't really care for the poetry bits. That just felt like showing off. Don't come for me, I know a lot of people love those bits. But yeah, it just didn't work for me. It was not my sort of book at all. At all. No. So yeah, I gave it 2.5 stars because I liked the first section. And after that, it just went downhill for me. And then we have One Piece by Eichiro Oda, which is a manga that everybody loves except for me. I gave it 3 stars. It's about a young boy who wants to be like a notorious pirate, and then he eats this weird fruit and becomes like stretchy rubber boy, and then goes off to try and like rustle up a crew, I suppose, for his pirating. But yeah, I didn't really like the artwork. I didn't really like the story. I thought it was quite sausage heavy. So yeah, no, not for me. Then in 11th position we have The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. I have done a solo review for this, so we'll leave that linked below. This is a time travel spy romance book where our main character has to effectively babysit a guy that they've brought back or brought into the future from the past, and things start going wrong from there. It was fine. The concept was really good. There was too much in it. It just didn't work very cohesively for me. It needed to probably be twice the page number to really do justice to all of the things that were in it, or it needed to lose some elements. Yeah, that's how I felt about it. This is really not conducive to filming. I can't. What are you doing? But yeah, as I said, I talk about it in a bit more detail in my solo review, so if you're interested, then head over there. Then moving up to 3.5 star territory, we have Hamlet by Shakespeare. So I read this because I was reading Enter Ghost, so we'll come back to that. But yeah, Hamlet is a Shakespeare play that I never read at school. This was in fact my first Shakespeare that I've picked up since high school, and it was fine. It was, it was alright. It wasn't hard to get into, as I had anticipated, but I did find that it was a little drawn out. I really liked the beginning with the ghosts. So Hamlet is a prince whose father may have been murdered, and so this ghost is potentially his father, and then things escalate. I feel like it's actually quite a short play, and the less you know going in, the better. But I was aware of some of the main plot points from reading Enter Ghost, and I was reading Hamlet. I was like, when do all these things happen? They all happen in the last act, like all of them. Like the last act is very dramatic, and so yeah, I wouldn't say this is my favourite Shakespeare, but I would say it's better than Tame and the Shrew. So that's where it sits in my very limited Shakespeare repertoire. Then still on 3.5 stars we have The Deep by Rivers Solomon, and this is about mermaids who were formed when slaves were thrown overboard from slave ships and were pregnant, and so the babies that came out were like mer people, and we follow one mermaid in particular who holds all of the memories of trauma. So in each generation one mermaid holds the whole traumatic history of their people, and it looks at generational trauma and the weight of trauma and why sharing history and trauma is important. And I thought the ideas around that, the themes around that were really interesting and really clever, but it felt almost more like an academic piece than a piece of engaging literature. I wasn't hooked by the story, but I was interested in what Solomon was trying to say. Does that make sense? So yeah, an interesting book for sure. I wouldn't recommend it to someone who's just looking for a fun time read. And I would say you kind of need to be in the mood for engaging your brain to really get the most out of that book. But yeah, I'm glad I read it for sure. Then in at 8th, and we are now moving up into 4th, and we have the aforementioned Enter Ghost by Isabella Hammad, which follows a woman who is Palestinian but living in England and has lived in England for a long time, and goes back over to Palestine and is asked to perform in a play of Hamlet, which is why I wanted to read Hamlet, but I was kind of reading them side by side and then I got spoiled for Hamlet and it all went a bit wrong. But this was a really interesting book. I think it was a really interesting look at life in Palestine and the sort of degrees of separation that people can feel who have left Palestine and then come back. And yeah, it was a good book. Wasn't one of my favourites of all time. I know a lot of people really love this book. I wouldn't say I was one of them, but I did really appreciate it and I liked what Hammad was doing. Then in at 7th I have a graphic novel, Atana and the Firebird by Vivian Zhu. This was recommended to me by my librarian, so thank you, Jo. And this is just a really sweet, wholesome, heartwarming graphic novel about a young person and a firebird who they live up in space. The firebird comes down to Earth and these two people meet, and it's about them discovering about themselves, about their own people, about what other people may try to take advantage of, and there's a lot of magic and friendship and just loveliness in it, and it is the first of a, I think, proposed trilogy, so it left on a bit of a cliffhanger for the next one, but I really enjoyed it and the artwork was beautiful. Then I have a children's book, Welcome to Trashland by Stephen. I cannot actually read my own handwriting, but it will be here and in the show notes. And I gave this one 4 stars also. This is following a young boy in Ghana who lives on a trash heap, basically, and he is an orphan and he sort of goes out and collects trash and then gets money for it when he sort of hands it into the boss of his like patch. And one day he kind of hears that there might be some buried treasure, and this new boy to the patch might have access to this buried treasure, and it's about their relationship together and the dangers of the gangs in that environment. And I just thought it was really well done. I said children's, probably more middle grade, more sort of young YA. So sort of 12, 13, 14, I would recommend this book for. But it was really interesting to look at a different culture and obviously what poverty looks like in that country. And yeah, just really well written, and it did have illustrations in as well. So yeah, great book if you are looking for something for that age group. Then in at 5th we have Saga Volume 10 by Brian K. Vaughan. This is a series that I've talked about a lot, and it's, in case this is your first video, it's a sci-fi graphic novel where we have two opposing sides of the war, and someone from one and someone from the other come together and have a baby, and so they are like mixed breed. The baby is mixed breed, Hazel, and she narrates our story, and we sort of see what happens as this war and political tension continues to rise once people find out about Hazel's existence. And yeah, volume 10 felt a little bit like a filler volume, but volume 9 was so explosive. I think they probably, Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples probably thought we needed a little bit of a rest. But yeah, I love the series. I have volume 11 on my TBR for September to read, and I am very much looking forward to it. Then in at number 4, and we are moving up to 4.5 star territory, we have I Remember Abbu by Hamid Azad. And this looks at, now it was like 3 months ago that I read this, so I think is it Bangladesh? I think it might be, if it's not, I'll write it here. A father and a daughter and their relationship. It's super short, and I'll be honest, I can't remember the details, but I remember being like gut punched at the end of the book. And so yeah, go in blind. It was a good book. Then in at 3rd place I have Sabriel by Garth Nix. I read this with Dia from Novel Idea, Jack from The Spread Book Joy, and Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot. And I ate this book up. You know, sometimes you just pick up books and it's like that the perfect book for the mindset that you're in. And it was easy reading, sort of YA fantasy, but like old school YA fantasy, not like fairy porn fantasy. And it was a really interesting concept around our main character Sabriel, whose father is a necromancer, but he's a special type of necromancer, and she is sort of learning these arts, and there's like an inside the wall and outside the wall situation going on, and she has to save her father. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I thought Sabriel as a character was really good. It was so plotty, so fast paced. I didn't want to put it down, and I would highly recommend if you haven't read it. It is part of a series. I think we are going to be reading the second one possibly in September. So yes, excited to read more Garth Nix. Then in 2nd place we have Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down, which is an Australian book, and we read this for the group read for Misery May, and Scott had recommended this before and I just hadn't gotten to it, and I'm so glad I finally did get to it because it was fantastic. It's split into 3 or 4 main parts. We're following the life of this woman, and she has a very traumatic life, and it sort of starts and we see her with her father to begin with, but she moves quickly into care, and it's about her life in the care system and then what happens after that. And basically this poor woman like experiences tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and it broke my heart, but it was so well written, and I just had so much empathy for this character. And something happens midway through the book and we're never quite sure whether to believe our main character or the opposite opinion. And there was some discussion in the group about whether we believed her or not. I absolutely believed her. And if you haven't read the book, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But there is a point in there where you kind of have to decide whether you trust the main character or not, and your decision there will influence and impact how you read the rest of the book after that. And I think that's so cleverly done, because no one really knows. No one can really know these things, right? So yeah, fantastic. Loved it. Highly recommend. And then in 1st place I have Red Country by Joe Abercrombie, which is the third and final standalone from his wider series. I wouldn't even say it was a standalone. I would say this is the sixth in the series because they do follow on from each other chronologically, and they do have some characters that sort of, cross over into different books. This one was really interesting because it was almost sort of Wild West style. The characters that we followed in this one sort of were going out into the desert. And we saw several characters that we've seen before. I won't tell you who because that would be spoilers. But it was, I really, really liked this one a lot. I didn't get on very well with the heroes, which was the fifth book. But Abercrombie was back on form, I felt, with this one. I read this with Jack and Alice. And so Jack and I are struggling a little bit with going forwards and picking up the next one in the series because we've read all of them together, the three of us. So we'll see what happens there. But Red Country was definitely a good one for us all to have read together, and I will be eternally grateful for that. And that is it. That is all of the books that I read in May. You'll be pleased to hear that June and July are a lot shorter. I read less books, so the videos should be shorter than this one. But I would love to know if you have read any of these, if you can cast your mind back to May, what was good that you read. And I will see you tomorrow with my June wrap up. Okay, thanks guys. Bye.